Hello bakers and those that want to learn how to bake. Today on Cooking with the Iron Maiden, I'm going to show you how to make Paska bread. My niece has requested that I do this. This is the traditional Slavic Easter bread, so I'll be using my mother-in-law's recipe for it. So before I get started making the bread, I want to get my bowl ready for the dough. I've already greased the bowl with some Crisco, and if you notice, I left a little bit of extra Crisco in the bottom of the bowl. When I make the dough, I'm going to smush it down into the bowl and turn it over so that the tops coat it with some grease. That will keep air from getting to the bread and keep it from forming a skin. I've also gotten 3 baking pans ready, 3 loaf pans ready while I was at it. This recipe will make about 3 loaves. You could also, though, make a bunch of mini loaves. It'd probably be at least 2 of these mini loaf pans worth. Those freeze really nice, and then you can pop them out whenever you want them. The camera guy really likes them like that size. So my pans are ready, my bowl is ready. For ingredients, I've got a ½ teaspoon of salt. I've got 1/2 cup plus 2 tablespoons of sugar. For flour, I've got 3 cups that I've already put in my mixing bowl here, and 4 cups that I'll add later on as we start to mix it. And with your flour, remember to always weigh it or to make sure you stir up your flour before you scoop it into the bowl. Otherwise it gets packed down and you'll have too much flour in your mixture. I've got 2 packages of yeast. If you're having a hard time finding the packages of yeast, you can also use this yeast in a jar. 2 1/4 teaspoons equals 1 package, so I've actually got 4 1/2 teaspoons of the yeast here to make my 2 packages. I've got a ½ cup of butter that I've melted. I've got 2 cups of milk. I'm using 2%, but you could use whole or 1%, whatever you like. And I've scalded the milk, so I've heated it to just below the boiling point. If you look, you'll see that there's just a slight skin on top of the milk, and that's how you know it's scalded. I've got 1/4 cup of water, and I've got 3 eggs. And I've got another egg that I'm going to set aside. This egg will be used for glazing the bread once it's about 3/4 of the way baked. So I'm going to pour my water into the mixing bowl, or the milk rather. I'm going to add the sugar because that will dissolve nice, and the salt into into the milk as well, and my melted butter. And I'm just going to stir that up to mix it good and to cool the milk down a little bit. I don't want the milk quite as hot as it was when it came out of the, just past the scald. It does need to cool down some. You should be able to stick your finger in it without burning it. Speaking of sticking your fingers in things, you should always start by washing your hands. I did do that before we started here. So I'm just going to stir that to make sure all the sugar and salt is dissolved. Let's see, yes, we added our water in there. So we're good. That's just about right. As I said, I've got the 3 cups of flour in my mixing bowl. I'm going to dump my yeast into there. And I'm just going to give that a quick turn just to mix up the yeast a little bit. And then I'm going to slowly pour this in and mix it up into a smooth batter. So you want to, it doesn't have to be drop by drop. When it starts to get a little splashing, give it a second to smooth out and then add a little more. You kind of stir it out a little faster, and then as it mixes, slow down a little bit. And I'm going to give my eggs a slight beat here, and we'll add the 3 eggs. They don't need to be thoroughly mixed, just partially mixed. And we'll slow this back down. Always slow your mixer down when you're dumping things in. It keeps them from going all over the place. And we'll take our little spatula and clean that bowl out as good as well. So I'm going to turn that up, and I'm just going to let this beat for a minute or 2 minutes until everything's thoroughly mixed. This mixture at this point is actually called a sponge, it's just a very loose bread batter, and then we'll add the rest of the flour to it in 1 minute here. It's been 2 minutes, so I've gone ahead and stopped my mixer. I'm going to take the regular mixing paddle out, and I'm going to switch over to a dough hook. Now, if you don't have a dough hook, just stir in the flour by hand and just start kneading manually at this point. But since I got a dough hook, we're going to go ahead and use that. I'll just also give it a quick stir, make sure all the bottom is mixed in there good. Okay. So we're going to put this back in the mixer here, or on the mixer stand. Put this on, and so now I've got my 4 cups of flour here. I said 4 to 5 cups. I'm going to see how it looks after I add 4 cups. If it's way too sticky, we can add another cup. So put this up, and we're going to slowly add in our flour. Actually, this might be easier to start out like this. So keep your mixer speed relatively low here while you're doing this. If you have it too fast, you're going to end up with flour all over the place. So that was 4 cups of flour. It still looks pretty goopy. Well, let's let that mix in a little bit. Now, if you look, you can see it's still pretty goopy. See how liquidy it is? So we're going to add at least another half a cup here. Yeah. Probably even the full cup. We'll let this cup mix in. Another 1/4 cup. I think it's almost there. So now what you need to do is you need to let the dough knead. So put a timer on, wait 4 or 5 minutes, and come back and check it. It's going to look really sticky right now. And if you see, it's kind of goopy and sticky in there. And after you knead it for a couple of minutes, it's going to be a smooth, silky dough. So I'm going to set the timer for about 5 minutes, and I'll see you back here. I'm also going to turn the mixer speed up a little bit. So we're going to turn it up to like a medium speed and let it mix for about 5 minutes. I've been kneading the dough for about 5 minutes now, but if you look in here when I put the mixer down, you can see the dough is kind of just flowing off of the dough hook there. I think it's a little bit loose yet. So I'm going to add another half cup of flour and knead it for another 2 minutes. And depending on the humidity, the size of your eggs, the amount of flour you use will vary. There is a little bit of a feel to the dough. You don't want the dough to be too stiff. This is a soft dough, but shouldn't necessarily run off the dough hook. So let me give this another minute to knead in here, and then we'll put this in the mixing bowl to rise. All right, we've got a nice smooth dough here. It's not running off too much, just a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and take this out, and actually I'm going to put some flour on my work surface here. I'm using a fair amount of flour. And we're going to just clean off our dough hook and then dump that out of the pan onto the flour. And we're going to knead it for 1 minute by so just going to get the dough out of the bowl here. It it is a soft dough. Though after it rises and you got a little bit of oil on the top, you'll find it's actually fairly easy to work. So give me just a minute to scrape the rest of this dough out of here. It's too good to waste. Okay, I've got the dough all out of the bowl. I'm going to sprinkle just a little more flour on the top. Now these bench scrapers are really nice for getting under the dough if it starts to stick a little bit. They're also fairly cheap. I actually got this one at the thrift store for only $1. So, oh yes, nice soft dough here. So I'm just going to work it a few times. So I'm going to kind of smooth it into a little bit of a ball. The dough is nice and smooth. And I'm going to drop it in the bowl here. And I'm going to turn it so that the top side, or the bottom is now the top, and I've got some oil on the top. That, as I said, is going to keep it from getting a skin forming while it's rising, keep the air off of it. I've got a clean towel that I'm going to put over this. This is going to double in size. Now, with this bread, you actually do a double rising. I'm going to let it rise once, I'm going to punch it down, I'm going to let it rise a second time. That will provide a better flavor. The longer you let your dough rise, the more chance there is for the yeast to do their work and the better flavor you get. So I'm going to see you back here in about an hour. And all right, our bread has really risen. Now all we need to do at this point is to literally punch the bread down. Just going to give it a little bit of a turn, knock some of that air out. And we're going to leave it in the bowl. We're going to put the towel back over it, and we're going to let it sit 1 more hour here. Then we'll come back and we'll shape it and we'll put it in our pans to rise. And then after it rises, in the pans, we'll bake it. So 1 more hour in the bowl here. See you back soon. All right, our bread has risen up again, as you can see here. So once again, we're just going to punch it down, knock the air out, and don't need too much flour here. We want a little bit. We'll save that there to work with. So I'm going to pinch off a chunk of dough here, and you want to fill your pans about 1/3 full, no more than halfway full. If you put much more than that in there, they're going to over-rise and overflow, and you'll have a big mess. So I'm just kind of got a piece of dough, and I've just worked it a little bit to, stretched it a little bit so I got a smooth surface here on the top. And I'm going to put that in the pan. We can probably actually use a little more in that pan. So I'm just going to kind of put that blob in the center and work the edges over and in, almost like I'm making a big giant roll. And just smash it down. So I'm going to put my smooth side up. And don't worry if it doesn't go completely out to the edges. As it rises, it'll spread out some. So we've got the one ready. And now what I'm going to do for this is my mother-in-law always braided a cross on the top of it. So I'm going to get 3 balls of dough and try and make sure they're about the same size or weight. Actually, since it's for Easter, let me grab my scale here and we'll weigh them to keep them the same weight. So let's see, that's 47, 48. I was pretty close there. I'll grab one more. That's going to be too much. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll out 3 long cords, or tubes, or whatever you want to call them, a little bit wider than my loaf of bread is here, so that I can make a braid. And it's hard to get them really thin, so what I actually do is I'm going to roll out 3 and then I'm going to cut them in half, so that I'll have 6 pieces, so that I can do a braid going in each direction and make a cross. So roll these out to about the same length, a little bit wider. I want them maybe a good 2 inches wider than my pan. That way when as you braid them, you'll lose a little bit of the length. And you want a little bit to tuck under the sides of the bread pan, or the loaf of bread, so that it's, nice on the top. So what I'm going to do is I can actually just use this guy here, and I'm just going to kind of lay him on the center and press down, peel it apart a little bit, and repeat with the other piece. And this way I get nice thin little pieces of dough that I can braid to make a pretty cross with. So put that in the center, peel it apart, do the other side. Oops, we got a little piece sticking there. Cut him. And again, like I said, this works really nice. If you don't have one of these, you can just use a knife and cut down the center. I kind of like to, like I said, press and pull as I found the best way to cut. So I'm going to press this down and then just peel them apart. So now I've got 6 pieces. I'm going to give them each, let's move him out of the way for right now. I'm just going to give them each a little bit of a roll. Cover up that little bit of a seam we just made cutting. And I'll pinch their ends together. So now what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to tuck this down the side of the bread and basically braid. You don't want to braid too tight because it's going to expand a little bit, and you want to leave a little bit of room for the expansion. And you want to try and make sure you go across the bread, not at too much of an angle. So we've got our braid there. Now we'll turn it 90 degrees, and we're going to do the same thing. Tuck this end down and simply braid. Just, if you've not braided it before, you just go left over the middle, or right over the middle, left over the middle, right over the middle, left over the middle, right over the middle, left over the middle. Just keep repeating that back and forth, bringing the outsides to the insides. We'll pinch that off, and just like I said, try and line them up a little bit. Okay, so that is good to go. We'll cover him up and he can be raising. And we're going to take the rest of our dough and we're going to fill our other 2 pans. So I'll just divide that roughly in half. I don't think I've divided it very well. I'll use my scale, I'll cheat. So 1075, so we want about 500 for each of these. 539. 536, that's close enough. Scales really are kind of handy. So to fill these other 2 pans, I'm just going to smush the dough out a little bit and roll it up. That's usually the best way to get a smooth loaf. Keep it relatively even. If you've got the dough reasonably flat and smooth to start with, then as you roll it up, you'll end up with a smooth loaf of bread and a fairly even loaf of bread. So I'm just going to make sure my ends are tucked in. It's reasonably smooth on the top. And we'll smush that down in our pan some. And we'll do the same thing with this third piece. So again, I'm just kind of smushing it out, making sure I've got my air bubbles out. And it's reasonably flat or level going across. The longer you make it, the easier it is to get smooth. And then once you do that, you can just start rolling it up. Stretch a little as you roll. So kind of lift, pull, stretch, roll. And just keep doing that. When you get down to the end, you want to pull that over and pinch. So I'm actually really pinching it as hard as I can. I'm going to pinch these ends and I'm going to smush those down so it's pretty. Get these ends smooth. Make sure I've got a reasonably uniform log. Turn it so my nice side's up. And we'll put that in this pan here. And we'll set all three of these here. And they can raise now. And we'll leave them to raise until they've doubled or tripled in size. This bread takes a little bit longer to raise than some of your other breads. The eggs, or the sugar and the eggs and the milk, all those extra, not the sugar, I'm sorry, the eggs and the milk can make it sometimes take a little longer to rise. So this is probably going to take at least an hour, maybe an hour and a half. Remember, if it's really cold in your house, you can always put a little heating pad under it, set on low. You can set it on your toaster oven on top of a couple of hot pads and turn your toaster oven for a cycle, or you can even use your regular oven. Put it in your oven, put a pan below it, a regular little roasting pan, and pour some boiling water into that pan. The heat and the steam from the water will stay in the oven with it and warm it up and make it like a little proofing chamber to help rise it. So we've got this here. We'll let this raise for, like I said, an hour, hour and a half until it's a nice size, and then we'll bake it. So I'll see you back here in about an hour. It's been a little over an hour, so I've preheated my oven to 325 degrees. The bread here, as you can see, has really risen. If you remember, that was pretty low down in that pan before. And look how much the cross has filled in there. So all I'm going to do is put these in the oven. And I'm going to set the timer for about 30 minutes. They'll actually take the bread is likely to rise a little bit after you put it in the oven, so be careful. Make sure you've got enough room on the shelves there for it. So I've got it at 325 degrees. I'm going to set a timer for 30 minutes. They actually need about 40 minutes to bake, but if you remember, we had that egg that we saved earlier. So I'm going to beat that egg up in a bowl, and after about 30 minutes, I'm going to brush some of the beaten egg yolk on the top. That's going to give them a nice soft crust and a beautiful color on the top of the bread. So I'll see you back here in about 30 minutes to baste the bread. It's been 30 minutes, so we're going to go ahead. We're going to take the bread out. We're going to give the bread a quick brushing or glazing with that egg that I reserved before. I beat that up with just with a fork. And I'm going to just take and paint or glaze that egg on top of the bread. This is going to help make the crust nice and shiny and also give it a nice brown color and keep it soft. So get all the edges, all the corners. And I'm also going to do one more thing. I'm going to cook the bread to about 200 to 210 degrees. And so that I don't have to keep checking it or popping it. I've never been very good at tapping bread to see how hollow it sounds. I'm actually just going to use my thermometer and put that in the bread so that I can keep track of the temperature for the last 10 minutes. It's probably going to need about another 10 minutes. So again, we're just going to glaze the top here. With the egg, and we'll pop him in the oven. Actually, we can probably use a little more in those cracks there. Get our cross good. We will pop the thermometer into this one and put him back in the oven. And we'll pull out our last one. I'll reset my timer for 10 minutes here, and we'll give him a quick glazing. So again, just glaze with a little bit of beaten egg. That's, like I said, going to give it a nice shine, color, keep it soft. And by the way, if I didn't mention it, you do grease these pans before you put the dough in them. Oops, we forgot to stick our last probe in. Okay, probes in. So we'll let it cook another 10 minutes, and we'll check it when the temperature is about 200 to 210 degrees. So I checked them at 10 minutes and they were still a little low, so I gave them about another 5 minutes. We're up to 205 on the first loaf now. The middle loaf is only 187, that was the bigger one, so we're going to leave him a few more minutes, and the other loaf is 206. So we're going to take out our two outer loaves and leave that middle one in there for a little while longer. So I'm just going to take these out. We'll leave him in, because like I said, he's only 187. We can take out these temperature probes. And I'm going to leave these set in the pan for about 5 minutes. If you try and take them out right away, they're just so soft, the weight of the bread will collapse in on itself. So leave them in the pan here for about 5 minutes, and then we can take them out onto a cooling rack and let them cool. And we'll leave our other guy in there for another 5 or 10 minutes. All right, I've given the bread 5 minutes. So now I'm just going to grab it and just tilt it out. And as I said, you do need to make sure, I did grease these pans before I put the bread in them, so you do want to use a greased pan. And I like to just set them on their side to cool. They help keep their shape a little better. And we'll do the same thing with this roll, or this loaf. And we've got our Easter bread ready. Now these are a little bit uneven here. You know, I should have probably rolled those strips out a little bit longer, and I would have had a little more smooth and even loaf. But they still look pretty good to me. This other bread it's at 198, so we'll give him maybe another 5 minutes to finish cooking, and then we'll take that larger loaf out. See you back in 5. Our temperature's up to 203, so I'm going to go ahead and take out this last loaf. It's nice and brown. Beautiful cross, beautiful color. So again, we're going to let this set for about 5 minutes before we take it out of the pan. That's going to help it keep its shape and structure when it comes out. So I'll see you back in 5 minutes. Our bread has had 5 minutes to cool, so I'm going to go ahead and tip it out of the loaf. Oops, must have gotten stuck somewhere a little bit. Let's run it around the edge a little bit. The cast iron pans do release nicer than the metal ones do. Where's he stuck at? Okay, there we go. We'll turn him over so he doesn't collapse the top in. So we've got our beautiful Paska bread ready for Easter. We've got a lovely cross braided on the top of this one. And we've got 2 regular loaves here as well. You do want to let it cool a few minutes before you slice it, but this one should be cool enough to slice. So you can see we've got a nice open airy texture. It's a nice light rich bread. The extra sugar and eggs in this makes a really rich bread. Giving it that second rising helps it to develop more flavor. Paska, your traditional Slavic Easter bread. I hope you've enjoyed today's Baking with the Iron Maiden. If so, please like and share this video, and please like our channel for more good cooking with the Iron Maiden. Thanks and happy baking.
Christos Voskles.